Good morning, everybody. Thanks for taking time to join this town hall. We have a variety of updates for you this morning. Let me begin by saying that together, and now almost 4 full weeks into this semester, we are doing together remarkable work. Our prevalence of COVID continues, thank goodness, to be very low to almost non-existent. Just today, we got another 0 positive cases on campus reading. So this is the time we've been successful, I think, because so many of our students, particularly in our residence halls and in classrooms and across campus, as well as our faculty and staff, have really adhered and leaning forward to comply with the protocols that all of us have put in place over time in support of our community's health. Thank you. This is not the time to let down our guard or to think we have this licked. The prevalence of virus can go up at any moment, as we've seen even in some of our neighboring universities. So please abide these protocols and continue to do this remarkable good work together. Today we want to brief you on a number of things: the budget, some of the Board of Trustees work that was done last Thursday and Friday. I want you to have some updates from Heather about the lawsuit. And so let's get started. John will provide an overview of our current work to address the revenue losses that we've had and the necessary budgetary expenses at this point, which we think of as phase 1 in this analysis. Heather will provide some updates on COVID and also the lawsuit. Kai will provide updates on plans related to spring semester, some ideas about the outcomes of the board meeting regarding academic affairs. Janet Cohn will also speak on the testing of student athletes and results to date. We will be sharing the same exact information with a group at 3:30 that will join us for the town hall later on this afternoon. And of course, all of you are welcome to join that one as well. So let me turn it over to John Pierce, CFO.
Okay, thank you, Chancellor Cable. I'd like to start by saying thanks to the Chancellor, to senior staff and their staffs, and to Clayton Fogg, our budget director, for all the hard work that has gone into the scenarios that I'm going to share with you. It's with several of the UNC schools going to all remote this fall, the efforts of everyone, students, faculty, staff, for the low rate of positive cases is really helpful in terms of our financial scenario planning. I'll be presenting 2 main scenarios today on 1 page. We spent most of our time really on the 1 scenario that has housing and dining revenues for the fall, which is the way it appears things are going at this point in time. Having said that, there are a lot of contingencies at this time, things in process. For example, back about 3 or 4 weeks ago, we were hoping that there'd be a new state revenue forecast in mid to late August. Now, due to contingencies, it appears that that state revenue forecast won't happen until late September due to all the unknowns at the state level and at the federal level in relation to what's happening between the Senate and the House on that front. So we find ourselves at UNC Asheville in that same boat, in being able to say, this is where we are at this point in time in phase 1, but things are changing each week and sometimes each day. And we'll keep you updated as we go forward. So with that, what I'm going to do is share my screen. And well, let me go back again. Okay. Okay, this is the 1-pager that we plan to share, and we have 2 columns. We have column R that is with housing and dining, and we have column S that is without housing and dining. So going right to the bottom line, if we do have housing and dining this fall, which so far is where we are, and this is the fall scenario only, we go down to the bottom and we have about $4.3 million of savings that we have to generate. And I'll talk about some of those revenue losses in just a second. If we don't have housing and dining this fall fully, now we're just started on this, then the loss would be 10.7 million. So that difference of 6.4 million in real simple terms is basically 1,280 beds at roughly $5,000 a semester, and that comes to $6.4 million as a difference. So right now, that's not appearing to be the case, but that is the worst case. And we try to, in our scenario planning, look at what is the expected case, which is column R, and then what is the worst case, which is column S. So going back up to some of the main assumptions in our budget scenario planning at this point in time is right now in row 10, we are not anticipating a state appropriation reduction. We'll talk about that a little bit more as we go forward. And when we say that, that's really the reversion that happens a lot of times in state budget crises. On enrollment assumptions, we planned on about a 5% enrollment drop, and that's about what we had due to the hard work, the really hard work of a lot of folks as we managed our enrollment. We had originally in early summer hoped that we would have 1,551 beds. We ended up at about 1,280, and I believe we are just barely above that at this point in time. So, and again, we see the two housing options. So when we look at the net revenue impact and we go to the $4.1 million net revenue drop on 42.2 million, which is the baseline for the fall of last year. Some of the key elements of that are the gross tuition and fees. While we had originally anticipated 5% drop, they actually came in at only a 4% drop, which is about 0.7 million of that 4.1 million. We had a slightly favorable mix on out-of-state students that helped that a little bit. And again, the really hard work of all involved in the enrollment management. On financial aid, we were slightly above last year. With financial aid, one of the things that we have is a Burge quasi-endowed trust of $2.3 million. And, you know, we are going to, that's going to help us with any shortfall. And, you know, that's one of the points of fundraising being so key to creating some of these endowments to help us in times like this. Our housing and dining revenues are down 13 and 11% respectively. That's about 0.9 million. Previously, we were looking at being up about 500,000 from last year. So that's another element, the 0.9 million and the 4.1 million. Athletics is currently projecting a revenue drop of 500,000. Game guarantees and Big South and NCAA funding are two key components of that. All other revenues, we're looking at dropping about 1.1 million, and that has to do with OLLI revenue losses, seasonal camps, vehicle registrations, Leadership Asheville, University Enterprises, and several other areas. And we have a few other things. We don't have a carry forward this year and a little bit more that adds up to the 4.1 million. When we go a little bit further down, we have estimated COVID costs of 1.5 million. That's PPE and sanitizing and all the various things that are happening. And we have from last spring, $500,000 that's coming into us from the state. We've already received that money. We did not draw down our endowment last spring by about $651,000, and that's helping us a little bit. And finally, we have some additional grant money. The SMI is the state strategic minority serving institutions money from the federal government. So all of those net 2.2 million, but there are two key rows here. One is the added state money from the CARES Act. And that's part of the uncertainty. Last spring, there was $44.4 million. We got almost $1 million of that, 448 for the fall, for the spring, and $500,000 this year. This fall, the system has requested $100 million from the legislature. The legislature is considering this at this point in time. That state funding could mean up to $1 million, that difference between the $1.5 million of COVID expenses and what we know right now. But that situation is very fluid at this point in time. The other big wild card is the HEALS or HEROES Act. Those are the two federal, proposed legislations, one House, one Senate. And that is being negotiated in Washington right now. Key point is that the range of the reimbursements to UNC Asheville from that legislation could be anywhere from 6.7 million to 10.4 million. I think it's a little bit more likely that that range is in the 6.7 to 7.9 million range, but that's a very important assumption. There's even right now a $500 billion, quote, skinny bill that is being negotiated that has full higher education funding in that of the 29 billion. The amount that would be coming to UNC Asheville is not just a number picked out of the air. That estimate is based on an estimate by school from the Association of Public Land Grant Universities, and has been calculated for each school. So we are hopeful that money will come in. So those assumptions on the federal and the state front are key. One of the things that we don't know that we will find out a little bit later in September is with the revised forecast. Right now, we're making an assumption of no state reversion as far as the budget at this point in time. Last year, there were significant monies that were carried over to the current year because we didn't have a budget last year. There was a lot of rainy day funds. So we think that's going to help, and hopefully that will be the situation as we go forward. When we go down and look at then the expense savings, we've got $2.1 million and what we had was we did kind of an across the board look at our other than personnel savings, and we came up with estimates of savings that are very significant. And part of the strategy here is really trying to cut as much as we could from other than personnel savings to avoid having to have personnel cuts as much as possible. So we have a 63% reduction in travel. That's about $600,000, a 33% reduction in supplies and materials, and housing and dining savings of about $500,000 and other $400,000 and other significant cuts, going forward. So that left the senior staff, with the need for $2.2 million of savings to make up that $4.3 million shortfall. So one of the key assumptions in our analysis right now is that we think that full 1.5 million, of which we only have $500,000 in hand right now, we think that additional $1 million will be coming in to reimburse our COVID expenses at this point in time. That's one of the wild cards. The state is sitting on $550 million of CARES money from the federal government at this point in time. And, so we are very hopeful on that particular front. Another key item in the savings is that we continue to have right now over 70 open positions, and we plan on greater open position savings than we had last year because of the additional open positions that we are trying to preserve as we try to balance the budget. So beyond these immediate areas, senior staff and each vice chancellor determined what else they could cut. And then we went through and made sure from a budgetary standpoint that with the savings detail that were submitted to us, that we didn't double dip with the across the board savings that we had. With all of that hard work, we were able to generate $2.2 million of savings to be able to, at this time, be able to have budget reductions that enable us to offset, the revenue losses. The key assumption is that with all of our hard work, we're trying to cut other than personnel expenses as much as we can, and we're trying to protect our workforce as much as possible in light of the many open positions at this time. The budget reductions in the non-personnel expenses will be significant, and the Vice Chancellors will be communicating about these reductions as things unfold. So this phase one and our budget reduction activities, where we put so much hard work into this, has allowed us to preserve the continuity of our employment at this time. We'll learn more in the coming weeks as far as our revenue, and we will make any adjustments as necessary. So I want to emphasize that this is a very fluid process that is changing daily, and we are basing our decisions based on what we know right now. There are a number of factors that are going to unfold. Our ability, for example, to continue our face-to-face modality of, or face-to-face hybrid modality of teaching at this point in time, the lack of a spike, the federal and state funding contingencies, and what we learn about our other revenue sources as we go forward. So having said that, in summary, we're trying to deal with the COVID-19 situation with as much financial integrity and humanity as possible, and we will continue to update you as things progress and to work through the situation together. And I want to say thanks to everyone for all the teamwork involved. And with that, I know that was very brief and a lot of information, but with that, I'll turn it over to Heather Parlare.
Thank you, John. I apologize. It's trash day and you may hear noise outside, so I apologize. So quickly, the lawsuit is the quickest update. As most of you know, faculty and staff filed a class action against the UNC system and each campus on behalf of all faculty and staff in the UNC system, alleging that returning students to campus for on-campus life is a hazardous workspace. There's been some back and forth. We were supposed to have several temporary restraining orders, so TRO hearings that were rescheduled. We now are in a space where the Attorney General's office, who represents the UNC system in litigation, is going to be mediating or have a mediation with plaintiffs' counsel, so with the attorneys for all faculty and staff. That hasn't been scheduled yet, but we will keep you updated as we know more. So that's pretty straightforward. I also just wanted to provide, I have just 5 minutes. I'm happy to get questions in the chat, but talk about our COVID reporting and our numbers. As Chancellor Cable shared, we continue to have very low numbers that are being reported to us. And we credit everybody who's here, all of the folks who have, really did work over the summer to create, plexiglass shields and designing the masks and putting the masks together. Our students seem to really be hearing the message and following the rules that they need to wear masks in class. I've talked to a number of you who are teaching in person about that, and you've all said the students enter with their masks, they keep on, they stay distant. So we're grateful for that. But as the Chancellor said, we don't want to ease up. We don't want to think, okay, we're okay now and we can loosen things. What I want to continue to encourage all of you to do, though, is to continue to report. If a student says to you, I think I have COVID, I've been tested, I'm positive, please, you can use the reporting form that we have on the website. We're staffing that for greater than just, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, we're keeping on top of that. The faster you tell us, and please do include the student's name, the faster we can engage in contact tracing, which is, as you see in the news and we hear, that is the best way we can continue to keep our numbers low, to contact trace to understand who needs to be in isolation and quarantine. So for you, especially telling us the name of the student, and a number of you have already done this, it's really helpful. We immediately have somebody from health and counseling follow up. We have I think almost 15 now employees who have gone through a certification to be contact tracers, so that we're really basically working with the Buncombe County Health Department to do contact tracing rapidly, because they have a whole county to deal with. So please use that form. Please, if you ever have questions, you can reach out to me. Jay Kutzbeck is here. I know he's here, and I volunteer him all the time. His inbox is full. We're happy to talk through any questions you might have, but please do report as soon as you know anything. Even if a student just says, well, I'm sick, you can, I don't feel well, I don't know if I have this. At first refer them to health and counseling, but then also report. Also, please make sure you're checking your own symptoms and reporting if you don't feel well or if you have COVID. You don't come to campus if you don't feel well. That's generally a good public health premise, but certainly right now we want to do that. And so with my 1 minute left, I want to say just two quick things. We are going to have the state health plan doing on-campus flu shots for our faculty and staff. So we're scheduling that. You should have seen that in an email that came from HR Benefits yesterday. So please save the date. We definitely, flu shots this year are important. And the other piece is to please do also remember that even though COVID is a public health pandemic, it's still personal health information. So please don't, if you have somebody who reports to you and they say, I've tested positive, report that to Human Resources, but please don't gossip about it. It might not be gossip, but you don't want to share that information widely. You really just want to keep it confidential and share it with either health and counseling for students or with HR for faculty and staff. So I think I'm up for my 5 minutes, and I'm going to pass it to Kai.
Good morning, everyone. There are a few things that I wanted to share about the academic affairs, coming out of academic affairs. Let me first talk a little bit about the spring schedule. And let me begin by acknowledging, I think one of the things that I've heard most often is the incredible challenges that faculty are facing, most often with respect to the dual mode of teaching. We know that there are a lot of faculty who have an in-person experience that they're trying to provide for students, at the same time that many students have required accommodations, needed accommodations, or just simply asked for accommodations. And faculty have really risen up and given students as best as possible the kind of modalities that are responsive to their needs. We know that that's been an incredible challenge, and one of the greatest things that we're trying to do for the spring semester is to determine some ways that we can limit the complexities of that, limit the kind of number of times that we have these dualities going on at the same time. Figure out good ways to provide some opportunities for students to get what they need in the kind of modalities that they are looking for, at the same time make it possible and easier on faculty to deliver on that. So we know it's been a challenge. We know that's one of the great things that's difficult right now. And so we anticipate that the spring semester will start in the first week of February. And we'll continue through, I think it's the third week of May is when exams will finally conclude. This does open up the opportunity for as we've talked about before, a one winter session. That's what we're thinking we're going to go with. Instead of having two, one in December and one in January, we're going to have 1 4-week winter session in January that will go from January 4th to January 29th. We anticipate that will be fully online and fully optional. We will not have a Maymester. And so in many ways, this term will be the way in which we have that 4-week session for the year. And so we expect that time, it will have the pay schedule of the Maymester, and that students will be taking courses in the same way that they would during that Maymester. Namely, these courses will not be a part of the spring term. Students will have to pay for these courses and the like. And so we hope that this will be an opportunity to have interesting courses, but also offer some courses that are in our offerings, just as we would during Maymester. The one thing that we will need to avoid is that any of these courses are mandatory. Certainly, just like any summer term session, we can't mandate that students take courses during this time. And so we want to be careful to have some offerings, but to ensure also that those offerings are not mandated by students, for students to take. And so as we think about the spring, let me just say one more word about the spring schedule. One of the things that we've talked about, some of us have talked about, is the possibility of having in-person opportunities. We want departments to think about, even if you are imagining a course being mostly online, are there ways that your department can imagine offering some in-person opportunities for students to engage? And we'll talk more about that, but we know that schedules are being created right now and are in fact, some have even submitted them. But the more we can create those in-person opportunities, the more we can satisfy the needs of students that are looking to have an in-person experience, while maybe perhaps maintaining as much, limiting the amount of duality that we're having to deliver on. So that's something that we're going to have to continue to think about and work on as we get closer to the spring semester. One other point that I want to make about is about evaluation. I think one of the things that I've heard from a number of either directly or indirectly from faculty is just a sense that the accomplishment has been disrupted, and in some cases, folks have been unable to do any travel that's important for their scholarship. In some cases, folks have not really had access to their research labs or time to really think clearly, given the enormous number of pressures that folks are facing. And so, a big question has been raised about, how does assess scholarship activity in this moment? Similarly, folks have been teaching in modalities and in ways and in environments that are completely new and different. And so there again, the question of how does one get assessed appropriately in this moment in their teaching? And all of those things are things that I don't have answers for today, but are certainly things that we're thinking about. Those who are pre-tenure, those faculty who are pre-tenure should know that you do have the option to delay going up for reappointment or for tenure for a year. But it's equally important, just in terms of the annual reviews that faculty undergo. How do we appropriately understand this moment in that context? So we'll continue to think about that. I'm going to be asking both department chairs and FWDC to really think hard about this issue and to make some recommendations about how we might make sure that evaluations are really fair in this moment. And I see a similar question about senior lecturers. Absolutely, the same thing goes for those senior lecturers as well. Making sure that all of the reviews, lecturers, tenure track, non-tenure track, visiting professors, every kind of review that we're doing needs to be reassessed in this moment and given the appropriate context. So we'll need to think through that. Again, I don't have all the answers, but I know that I want to just kind of indicate that it is on the radar. It is something that we're going to be thinking through very quickly over the course of this early part of this fall. A couple of other things. Chancellor Cable noted that we had a board meeting recently. The board meeting prior to this one that happened in July was really only an executive briefing board meeting, and so we didn't have a chance to do two important pieces of business. That was to address the promotion to full professor from last spring, and the voting on emeritus status for faculty. I'm very pleased to announce that John Brock in chemistry, Patrick Fu in psychology, Jamin Lee in mathematics, Jason Wingert in health and wellness, and Kate Zubko in religious studies were all promoted to the ranks of full professor. And so we would want to extend my congratulations to each of them for this accomplishment. In addition, we had Chuck Bennett in physics, Dean Brock in computer science, John Eric Gant in languages and literatures, Tommy Hayes in the Graduate Center, David Hopes in English, Kevin Moorhead in environmental studies, Steve Patch in mathematics, David Steele in mathematics, and Scott Walters in drama, representing over 28 years of service on average for each of them. Have been awarded emeritus status. And so also want to congratulate all of those folks for achieving that status and most importantly for their long years of service to the institution, the longest being 38 years. So quite a time and quite a tenure at UNC Asheville. And I know that they represent extraordinary contributions to the institution. And then finally, I'm very pleased to announce, I'm very excited to announce that Darren Waters, who is currently Associate Professor of History and who serves on the senior staff as the Executive Director of Community Engagement, will, in addition to continuing his service in these two capacities, serve in academic affairs along with reporting to me. And among Darren's duties will be the direction of the honors program. And in an expanded capacity as described in some of the prior leadership position documents. Part of this work includes expanding the scholarship programs as part of being in the honors program. And we're hoping to grow the programming, grow the resources, grow the connections to community engagement in all parts of these programs. He will also work with both me and the Chancellor on special academic programs and connections of special programs to academics. Importantly, you've heard us talk about in some of the earlier town halls about the kind of Chautauqua style or Aspen Ideas Festival kind of programming that we imagine happening over the summer and we'll be working on. And we'll be looking forward to Darren really contributing his experience and expertise in thinking through that kind of work as well. So very much looking forward to having Darren on my team, as it were, and working with him on these matters. And I think that concludes my remarks. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Janet. I think you're up next.
Thanks, Provost Campbell. I want to thank everybody for giving us a little time this morning to go over some of the athletic protocols. Back in March, when intercollegiate athletics was literally shut down, the CDC and the American Medical Colleges Association, Big South Conference, and the NCAA recommended we form a COVID action team for athletics and develop really intensive and thorough protocols for the time that we would return to campus and return back to practice. Our COVID action team has been meeting multiple times a week and continues to meet with Jay Cutsmith, Dr. Martha McKay, Dr. J.D. Hales, Dr. Laura Jones, Terry Burney, David Jandrew, student athlete representative, Rebecca Naum. So that group, I want to say thank you because you have really put together a lot of work that continues to change. As we started transitioning athletics back in early July, we were continually looking for best practices in order to help our protocol. So we've been actually working with athletic directors across the country, the athletic directors in the state of North Carolina. We even got best protocols from NASCAR and most recently from United States Marine Corps. We actually, Colonel Ferry's son is a student here, and he got his executive team together with us to help us make sure that we're doing not what's asked, but even more than what's asked so that we can keep everyone on our campus safe. One of the things that we are doing every morning at 5 a.m., all the student athletes and the staff and the coaches, we get a text message that we have to answer several questions before we can even come to campus. If you don't answer those questions, then you're not allowed to come to campus nor to go to class or work out. So you get a green check and you come. If you answer a question that indicates that you don't feel well, and I saw some people asking questions, oh, I got a headache, I have a stomach virus, immediately a red X will appear on your phone and a text will go to one of our sports medicine staff, mostly Tim White, who's on our COVID team. Tim will tell that student athlete to stay where they are. He'll then work with Jay Cutsford and we will get that student athlete checked before they do anything. So a student athlete that is not feeling well will not be in your classes. They will not be in the workouts. Any student athlete has symptoms, we are mandated to test those student athletes. So when you think that with all the testing that's been going on from July to now, with the student athletes being required to be testing, our results are really phenomenal. But as Chancellor Cable and I have said many times, we're not going to pat ourselves on the back yet. We need to be about 6 to 8 weeks into this. The NCAA has also classified our sports as high risk, medium risk, and low risk. And each sport has to have their own individualized protocol for practice. So if, for example, our swimmers are a low risk sport. So there's a certain protocol that they must follow and a certain testing protocol. Men's and women's basketball, volleyball, men's and women's soccer are high risk sports. Their testing protocols and what they can and cannot do are much more detailed because we have recognized through research that those are the sports where you might have a higher likelihood of giving someone COVID. So as you watch different sports, you will see different protocols. Yes, you will see student athletes at times that don't have masks on. That could be because they are in a low risk sport or in a situation where they do not have to have those on. And that is very important. Right now, because we are not in a competitive season, we are mandated to test at least 25 to 50% of all of our student athletes every 2 weeks. So we'll have a rather large test going on. If you go by W.T. Weaver Health Services on Saturday, you will see the testing tent set up and a large group of student athletes. None of those student athletes are being tested because they have symptoms. They're being tested as surveillance, and we'll get the results. We are working with a testing lab called Mako Medical, and we've been getting the results back rather quickly, 48 hours. That means we can really, if someone tests positive, as Heather mentioned, the tracing can go, we call it a person of interest. We start looking for persons of interest. Jay Cutsford and that whole team during the tracing has been phenomenal. You always hear the word isolation, that somebody's positive, quarantine if you've been exposed. Athletics has another third thing that we require of our coaches, staff, and student athletes called restricted movement. We have asked everyone that has gone through this phase-in process that are now back to not leave the immediate Asheville area. So if someone, including a coach, or if I have a wedding to go to in South Carolina, when I come back, I have to not be around student athletes or coaches or other people for 7 days. So if a student athlete decides they want to go visit someone at Clemson, when they come back, they can't just jump right back into practice. The other thing you'll notice with the student athletes, they are in functional units. And some of those functional units, like baseball, instead of the whole team practicing at once, you will see them in groups of maybe 10 or 11 to avoid exposure. Later on in the semester, we'll get, as we perfect our practice protocols, then you'll see us doing more of what we call blue-white scrimmages and things like that. But first, we got to learn how to do what we're doing. And so far, it seems to be working. As many of you know, Chancellor Cable's told you, fall sports have been delayed to the spring. Winter sports have not been delayed. So you will see coming out shortly that basketball and our swimming actually swimming is scheduled to start competitions in October, basketball in November. So we'll give you more on that. Right now, we do not anticipate any spectators whatsoever at this point in time. Our protocols based on the NCAA right now is to keep the athletes and the coaches as safe as possible. But when we do get to spring, because we have some very good scholar athletes, we may have all 16 of our sports competing in January, February, March, April, May. We just don't know that yet. So be prepared. It's going to be a very busy spring. A couple other things I just want to mention that I think is very, very important is that we really appreciate everybody being mindful of athletics. When you point out something, we look into it immediately, because sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and it may appear that a student athlete or a team is not following protocols. We'll look into it. We'll check into it. We're also, Bill Hager and I both, because we have about 50% of our student athletes live on campus, 50% off campus. We've even developed really great relationships with our the Verge and University Place apartments, because we know off-campus activities sometimes is what's actually causing. It's not going to class and it's not practicing. It's what we're doing when we have spare time. So we're even monitoring those things to try to keep the campus as safe as possible. But I want to thank everybody for your feedback, for your input, and especially the COVID action team. And we'll keep monitoring this. And right now, so far, so good. So thank you.
Thank you, Janet. Your efforts and those of your student athletes and coaches are obviously making a measurable difference, because the athletic areas on other campuses have been some of the first spotted clusters. So we just appreciate how clear and careful you're being with athletes. Sarah, would you like to go now to the chat, and let's cover as many questions as we have as we can possibly cover, and then I'll make a few brief closing remarks.
Yes, thank you, Chancellor. And thank you all for the engaged conversation, the questions and the answers in the chat. Many of them have already been answered, so I'm going to go through the document and just pull up those that have not yet been answered. And many of them relate to questions around COVID and testing. So I'm just going to throw a few of these out there in one group, and then we can answer them. If a student tells us that they're quarantining themselves due to exposure to a roommate who is tested positive or sick, should the faculty report that as well, just to make sure the dashboard is reporting those cases and the administration is aware? Another one where there's a question about when will the reporting dashboard be updated to include number of tests and positivity rate? Can it include active cases as well as new and cumulative? And a couple other questions about this. Has there been any talk about analyzing wastewater as part of our COVID testing process? Can instructors please be informed if a student athlete is put in quarantine? And one last one, how much would it cost to expand the athlete testing protocols to the broader campus community? I know that's a lot all in one go, but there you have it.
Is Tim Elgren on the call? Because Tim has been our primary liaison related to the wastewater research that can drive predictive positive results of COVID in advance of seeing them on testing. Tim, are you on this call?
I am.
Okay, Tim, would you mind speaking to this, because you spent a good amount of your time exploring with a researcher our viability as a site?
Yeah, so we put together, really in a very short amount of time, a very good proposal to implement wastewater treatment and incorporate the 3 sewer districts of Buncombe County and our neighboring institutions. And these are strategies that have been very successful at this point and widely implemented. You maybe saw in today's Chronicle of Higher Education, and it's in the New York Times this weekend. Unfortunately, our primary funding agencies, we needed about $400,000 to get this going and to give us a 2-year window to do this work. Our funding agencies said that this was not something they were interested in. So we really struck out on all fronts, giving this a good go. The chemistry department, Keith Crumpy, were really great in terms of getting a situation set up for this researcher to join us and do this work. But these results allow us to not only sample in an anonymous way our campus, but allow us to test for people showing they're asymptomatic or showing low symptoms. So it really is a great cross-section. We'll continue to push this because it also is it has established and the places that have it fully developed at this point are places that were already using it for following opioid excretions or excrement into the wastewater system. So there are places that have been doing this for a long time, and those are places in Boston and in Spain that had seen the uptick of COVID-19 well before any hospitalizations. So there's some really well-established evidence to support this work. So we'll keep trying.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. I really appreciate it. Who else would like to take some stabs at the other questions that Sarah mentioned?
So, Chancellor, I can talk about the reporting. I think someone said, should I report even if, the student may have reported? Please just report. We don't mind double, duplicative, the more information we have, the better. So yes, please do report. The positivity data is something that folks have asked to put on our public facing dashboard. And we have committed to doing that. I think that our struggle is, the past 2 weeks. So we've only done it for 2 weeks and we do it on a weekly basis. The positivity rate is 0. And so we wanna make sure we're framing it for you all in a helpful way, because 0%, it doesn't tell us much. So we're working on how we make sure we're providing the information as fully as we can to you and not just a number. But we are committed to putting that up on our public facing dashboard. I think those were the questions, Sarah.
Yes, I think there were a couple other questions about, hold on, I'm pulling up my document here, related to, so sorry, just a second. I got a little lost posting that last link there. And then how much would it cost to expand the athlete testing protocols to the broader campus? And can instructors be informed if a student athlete is put in quarantine?
Janet?
How much would it cost? Well, I'll tell you, kind of answer that part of the question first. We're required by the NCAA to do the PCR test. That's the only one that's permitted. That's the gold standard. That test runs about $80 per person. And when you are doing surveillance testing, and Jay Kutzvik can chime in on this, he knows much more about testing than I am. Your insurance does not pay unless you have symptoms. So this is something that we're going to have to pay for going forward. So that's kind of a critical part of this, is that's a requirement for student athletes. And I think the CDC originally recommended for college students and students coming back to campus, they did not recommend testing, because I will tell you this, you can test someone today and 48 hours later, 3 days later, they could test positive. It's one of those things. So it's a requirement for us. Jay, do you want to answer? You know more about testing than anybody, I think, on campus.
Yeah, testing, and it's evolving all the time, the new technology. We are looking at getting the rapid test here. But again, the supply for that particular test is not available right now, but we expect to get that soon, and that is a little cheaper. The problem with the rapid test is you can't trust false positives, so it has to be confirmed with a PCR test. But as Janet mentioned, testing is pretty expensive. It's $85 to $100 for tests, so to do that for a large group of students would be pretty costly. I also know that on some of the other universities, they're having difficulty getting students to agree to do that, because they're afraid if they, in fact, do that and test positive, then they're going to have to go in quarantine for 14 days. So that is not an incentive for some students to do that. So there are a lot of issues around doing the testing thing. There's also a new saliva test that they're looking at that would even be cheaper than that. But again, the technology isn't quite there enough to trust the reliability of that. So we're trying to stay on top of all of that and make sure we have the best tests that are available for our students.
Thank you so
Bill,
much.
I see a question here from Sally Wasilewski about students being permitted on campus over winter break. Has that decision yet been made?
I responded in the chat, but Kai, maybe you want to reiterate that?
So yeah, so I did try to answer that one in the chat, so right now, we're hoping that there is a possibility for students to be on campus in some limited capacity. I think we are, want to be cautious at this point about that. Clearly, once you have a certain critical mass of students on campus, then how will buildings be used? How much access? How much cleaning? There are a host of things that need to be considered once we start bringing folks back. But the hope is that we are able to do that. There are just some things some logistics that I think we just need to think through very carefully to be sure that we can do so as safely as possible. So I'm tentatively optimistic about the possibility, but right now, not yet ready to be definitive about that.
Thanks, Kai. We'll just take two more questions real quick, Chancellor, before we pass it over to you. These are both for Heather. One is asking, would it be possible to provide the number of tests done each day or week on the dashboard, just to give a context to the positivity rate, even if it remains 0? And the other is just a clarification on whether the flu shots are available to those under the age of 18 or not.
So the information, and we put that on the email yesterday, it's new this year, and this is a recommendation from the state health plan, or actually a requirement from the state health plan, that those who are under the age of 18 won't be able to get the on-campus flu shots. And then I did respond in the chat, when we publish the positivity percentage, we do plan on providing the number of tests as well. So it's going to be the raw number as well as the rate.
Chancellor, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Thanks, everyone. Couple of closing comments. The Board of Trustees, as I mentioned, met last Thursday and Friday. Thursday was a series of their standing committee meetings in each of the key areas of the university, and Provost Campbell has just reported out, for example, of some of the action they took regarding our emeriti and our move to full professor promotions. The second day, we focused on 3 particular things. Among the most important, in my view, was some discussion about our intentions related to a community-wide needle-moving action agenda over the next year to year and a half, particularly including some work this fall that will be a part of an all-campus driving forward here, because there are existing committees, there are existing interest groups in much of this area. The senior staff and I have been putting together what we hope will be a racial justice roadmap that isn't an on high down to everyone else on campus, but in fact is an invitation to take some of our most serious needs for real progress on our campus and in our surrounding community very seriously related to racial justice advocacy. And so we'll be beginning to share this racial justice roadmap ideas with leaders on the campus, faculty senate tomorrow afternoon. I hope staff council in the week ahead. I hope SGA with London in the week ahead. So we'll have a way for all of us in our own specific ways with our interests and our expertise to come together around particularly, I think, the largest effects in positive ways for our campus to reduce any racial injustice on our campus and to move us forward as a fair, diverse, inclusive, and equitable place to live and work and to learn. So stand by on that. The board responded very affirmatively to our initial suggestion based on excellent research that was done back in 2014 and 2015 about the renaming of buildings that had been named for persons whose values do not align with the values of the institution. They took 3 actions. One is to take the name off of Vance Hall. That's already down. The plaques have been removed. The same thing was to take the name off of Hoey Hall. Both of those are located in our residence life area in what's called Governor's Village. Those names and nomenclature have been removed from both buildings. And their third work in this area initially was to say to me, you must convene a task force to study the history of the rest of the buildings on campus to make sure that any other building renaming that needs to happen comes before the board during this academic year. It is they alone who have the single power to name any place or space on campus. So they're calling for a full-scale review. And again, we are building on the work of Maya Newland, who was student body president in 2015. We're building on the terrific work that Patrick Balls and others have done over years to bring these issues forward. And we hope that we will have resolutions by the end on this particular matter, as well as many others over the course of this academic year and the coming years. They also then focused on the budget. You've heard the summary from John Pierce. Needless to say, they're very concerned about the fiscal capacity and viability. I was delighted to learn from them in the course of the conversation around budget that preserving the continuity of employment for our employees is deeply important to them as our leadership board, and they are urging us to proceed carefully. They do want us to get much more information about the CARES, the HEALS, the HEROES Act money that will back and fill the budget cutting that we're currently planning on. So we had a very responsible conversation about that. And the third thing was actually to brief them not only on what we're doing with COVID, but how we are going to continue during this academic year to move forward on the revitalization plan components that can be addressed in this academic year. We know that there's tremendous financial, fiscal, tight budgeting going on, not just here, but across the state. We've also been told by the visitors who came from the UNC system that that's likely to get even worse next year. Then we'll come out of this after the budget is right-sized back at the state level. But our trustees, because they are hearing from some leaders at the UNC system, want us to continue to do the things that we can do this year relative to continuing to improve our fiscal capacity, our culture of philanthropy, and also improving our academic innovation and opportunities to support faculty and staff. So that was a positive conversation despite some of the pressures that we're all feeling around budget and COVID. I want to congratulate now our student athlete leaders and SGA president for their terrific success in organizing a rally, a peaceful rally last weekend, last Friday evening, that was combined with a march through campus, stating their both hopes and demands for some movement on racial justice work here. I want to commend those student athletes and our student government president, London Newton, for real leadership in this moment. And we appreciate what they have done and will continue to support our students in their work and their thoughtful calls for change. I want to also say that I was reminded this morning with a great email that came to all of us as faculty and staff from Corey Anderson and Robert Straub and Kate Johnson and Dr. Ashley Moragas, reminding us all to vote. 8 weeks from tomorrow, on the 3rd of November, is polling and voting and the election in this nation. And I hope in some way or another, with plenty of planning time ahead of us now over the next 8 weeks, that all of us will make a commitment to exercise our democratic right to vote for not only our presidential candidates, but others involved in our local and state policies. So please make every effort that you can, and let's be supportive to back each other up in ways to cover when we need to get to polls, and voting early when possible would be great. So just wanted to commend the work that the Political Science Department, the Office of Student Development, and the Key Center are doing to put this front and center in our shared responsibility, not just for our community, but for the larger nation. Thank you so much for your time today. We somehow did this in 60 minutes. We will repeat much of what you've heard today, or all of what you've heard basically at the 3:30 session today. Feel free to join again if you'd like to, or you think of other questions to put in the chat then. So grateful for your time, grateful for our remarkable shared effort for tremendously positive results in the face of some very difficult situations for all of us. Special kudos to our faculty and to all of our staff. Thanks again. Good to have you with us.